Annabelle was young when her mother took her away to live in the city with her uncle, Mr. Daniel. That night, before traveling to the city to meet Uncle Daniel, Annabelle's mother told her to be obedient to her uncle. "My dear, make sure you listen to your uncle," her mother said. "He's a good man, and always be respectful towards your elders as I've taught you, and do whatever your uncle tells you to do, because he's a wise man," Annabelle's mother said. Then she began to arrange her luggages for the long journey to Uncle Daniel's house. Very early the next morning, Uncle Daniel drove into the compound, and Annabelle was already prepared and waiting for her uncle to take her to the city. Annabelle happily took her bags and sat down in the car happily while the car engine started. Annabelle's mother was a little bit sad because the city was very far from the village, which was going to make it impossible to see her daughter anytime soon. "Please take care of my daughter and don't forget everything I've taught you, Annabelle," Annabelle's mother said while waving at the moving car. The journey to the city was long and fun. Annabelle enjoyed watching all the tall buildings and the beauty of the city. She was amazed by all the sights and sound of the city. Uncle Daniel noticed her amazement and smiled. "You will get used to the city life soon," he said. He finally arrived at Uncle Daniel's house in the city. Annabelle was so shocked to see the big mansion her uncle was living in. When they got inside, she was asked to come to the dining table to enjoy her jollof fries and juice. Mr. Daniel is a successful businessman. He has a wife and 2 children who live with him in the city. But Uncle Daniel's wife is a traveler. She always travels from one city to another, sometimes visiting the house only twice a month. As Annabelle settled into her new life, she began to notice her uncle's behavior towards her was changing. He would often find excuses to touch her and make her feel uncomfortable. At first, Annabelle thought maybe her uncle was overly affectionate, but as the incident continued, Annabelle realized that something was wrong. She felt trapped and scared and didn't know who to turn to. One day, as Annabelle was playing with her uncle's children, she heard her uncle scream their name, so she went to answer him. Uncle Daniel was inside his room. It was Saturday, so he stayed at home. He doesn't work on Saturdays. He was inside his room watching a video on the television. The video was an adult video, which was improper for a young girl like Annabelle. Annabelle got into the room and saw her uncle watching the television. Uncle Daniel stared at her for some seconds, and he noticed that Annabelle was wearing an attractive dress. He then told her to get him a glass of water, and Annabelle rushed to go get the glass of water. When she left the room, Daniel began to have bad thoughts about his niece and was further influenced by the movie he was watching. So he wanted to do exactly what he saw in the movie with his niece, seeing that his wife was never around because of her kind of business, so he felt. Few minutes later, Annabelle returned to her uncle's room with a glass of water. Uncle Daniel collected the glass of water and kept it on a small table beside his bed, and he stood up and locked the door as the young girl Annabelle was confused as to why her uncle was locking the door. He looked at her face lustfully and asked, "Annabelle, I need something from you." She then asked him what he wanted. "I want you to give me what my wife hardly does." Annabelle was confused as she didn't know what her uncle was talking about. She thought about it but couldn't figure it out. Then Uncle Daniel proceeded by placing his hand on Annabelle's shoulder. He grabbed her softly on the shoulder. He tried to bring his hand down to where he was not supposed to touch, but Annabelle quickly removed his hands from her body. "Uncle, my mother told me not to allow anybody to touch me here," Annabelle said, looking at her uncle. She was scared but didn't know what to do. Her uncle was already into her, and he wanted to take advantage of the opportunity. "Annabelle, remember your mother told you to do everything I say. That's because she knows I can't hurt you. Let me touch it now," Uncle Daniel said with a soft voice. Annabelle thought for a while and remembered that her mother told her not to disrespect her uncle, and then she allowed her uncle to touch her exactly where he wanted to. As a young girl, she didn't quite understand what her uncle was doing, as she had not experienced that before. At that point, Uncle Daniel proceeded even further. When she couldn't take it anymore, She told her uncle to stop, but her uncle didn't listen. He proceeded even further. She tried removing herself from the situation, but she couldn't. She cried and cried, but no one could come to her aid. Meanwhile, Daniel's children were in the living room playing. They were waiting for Annabelle to come back, but what they didn't know was that Annabelle was going through a difficult situation. They then heard her scream, as if she was in trouble. One of Mr. Daniel's children decided to go check what was happening. As he walked towards Annabelle's voice, he realized that the cry was coming from her father's bedroom. The little boy, wondering what was happening in the room, tried to open the door, but the door was locked. Mr. Daniel quickly noticed that someone was standing at the door. He heard his son's voice and opened the door, pretending as if nothing had happened. His son Michael walked in anxiously and asked his father, "What was wrong with Annabelle?" "I heard her crying. What is wrong with Annabelle?" Michael asked. "Don't worry, son. Annabelle fell while trying to get me a glass of water, so I was attending to her. She'll be fine, don't worry," Daniel replied to his son. Annabelle knew that her uncle was lying, but she couldn't speak out because her uncle told her to be silent. She was sad and angry. It was a day she would never forget in her life. Annabelle sat on the bed crying. Her uncle noticed that she was still sad and went up to her. "Stop crying, Annabelle. You're almost a woman now. You will get used to it," Uncle Daniel said. But Annabelle was confused and didn't know what to do. She said to him, "Uncle, please don't do that to me again. It hurts." Daniel smiled and said, "Annabelle, it's just a fun game between you and I. Don't worry. Next time we'll play a different kind of game," Daniel convinced her as he brought out a gift and gave it to her. Annabelle accepted the gift, which made her smile a bit, as he informed her that her mother would be visiting the next day and warned her not to tell her mother anything, or she wouldn't be getting snacks and gifts from him anymore. "Or don't you want me to get you beautiful things?" he asked. "No, Uncle. I want you to get me more beautiful snacks and gifts. I won't tell my mommy," Annabelle said. The little child was confused and didn't know what to do, but she didn't want to disobey her uncle. As night went on, Annabelle couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what had happened between her and her uncle. She didn't know how to confront him, but she needed to do something about it. The next day, Annabelle's mother arrived in the city. Annabelle was excited seeing her mother, but she was also nervous about what had happened with her uncle. As they sat down to eat, her mother asked her how she was faring. Annabelle wanted to tell her mother everything, but she was scared. "I'm fine, Mommy," Annabelle said, trying to hide the pain. Her mother looked at her closely, sensing that something was wrong. "Are you okay?" her mother asked again. Annabelle looked at her, unsure of what to say. Just then, Uncle Daniel walked in, smiling, pretending to be a good man. Annabelle's mother thanked him again for taking good care of her daughter. Daniel smiled, telling her not to worry, that he would continue to take good care of Annabelle and arrange a new school for her. Annabelle's mother was happy that Daniel would enroll her daughter in a good school, as she couldn't afford to send her to one. That's one of the reasons she was sent to the city in the first place. Annabelle's mother stayed with them for 2 weeks. Uncle Daniel couldn't carry out his evil plans with Annabelle because her mother was around. He just couldn't risk it. When it was time for Annabelle's mother to go back, Uncle Daniel gave her loads of food items and some money. She thanked him and waved her daughter goodbye. A few days after her mother had left, Mr. Daniel, now ready to continue his evil deeds, one fateful day, as Annabelle was cleaning the house, she heard her uncle call out her name. She became scared again, knowing her uncle wanted to make her feel uncomfortable again. As she stood in the living room, she couldn't run or say no. She had no choice other than to walk down to her uncle's room. As she opened the door, her heart raced as she stood at the entrance of the door. "Annabelle, I have plenty of snacks for you. Come, let's play our usual game and I'll give you lots of them," he said. "But uncle, the game is very painful. It makes me feel uncomfortable," she replied. But Uncle Daniel continued to convince her, telling her that it was just a game. And again, Annabelle fell for his tricks. But this time, he had a knock on the door. But it wasn't his kids. It was his wife. "Honey, it's me. Open the door. I'm back," his wife shouted while trying to open the door, but it was locked. She wondered why her husband would lock the door. As soon as Annabelle heard the voice, her face lit up with joy. She felt a sign of hope, knowing that someone had finally come to rescue her from a troubled situation. Or so she thought. To ensure you don't miss out on these captivating stories, be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel and stay tuned. Beyond every tale lies wisdom.